Hi, everybody. I'm Patrick McDonnell. I'm the president and CEO here at PennFuture. Thank you all for being here. Very excited to be joining this webinar with our strategic partners at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, who I know did fantastic work during this election cycle, and I'm excited for you all to hear about that. We come at things from more the policy side. And for those who don't know, PennFuture, we're an environmental advocacy organization. We work on clean energy, clean air, clean water, and we do that in the Capitol, in the courts, and in communities all across the Commonwealth. I'm hearing I'm breaking up. I want to make sure. Good. All right. Um, So before I came to PennFuture a few years ago, I spent 25 years in state government. And that really showed me the importance of the topic we're going to be going over today. I worked at the Public Utility Commission. I worked at the Department of Environmental Protection. And one of the things that you learn in that process is that, frankly, our departments in state government are designed to make the same decision today that they made yesterday, which will become the same decision that they make tomorrow. Whatever worked for them to win a case yesterday, that's the decision they're going to make today. That is the decision they're going to make tomorrow. And it became clear that we need organizations, we need lawyers from PennFuture. You'll be hearing from Abby Jones in a little bit to frankly to get in the middle of those processes, to question the wisdom that has taken hold in terms of judicial decision making, regulatory decision making over time. And the courts are our best opportunity in order to make some of those very real changes through legal argument, through litigation, through filings that we may do. So having the opportunity to be in front of the courts with our legal team is as effective, if not more effective, sometimes than a regulatory change or a statutory change that we may do. In particular, we've been very focused on the Environmental Rights Amendment. Pennsylvania is one of the few states that has an amendment in its state constitution that guarantees everyone in the Commonwealth the right to clean air, pure water, and the enjoyment of natural resources. So protecting that, advancing that through our courts is important. Abby will explain our work there, and then later on you'll hear from others who will explain how those courts how those courts are composed, and your all role in that. With that, I'll stop and turn it over, I believe, to Abby to walk through how PennFuture works through these issues.
Great, thanks, Pat. And if we could just advance the slides. So why do courts matter? I'm Abby Jones, Vice President of Legal and Policy. I'm based out of our Poconos office, and I am an environmental attorney by trade. I think some of you may have seen me on other presentations, so I just want to thank you for having me today. So why do courts matter to environment? I'm going to take a few minutes just to kind of set the stage on the power of the legal system to help protect our environment and how groups like PennFuture have utilized this tool. So next slide. First, I want to quickly introduce our amazing team of attorneys who represent PennFuture. We have a small but mighty team spread across Pennsylvania working on everything from air quality to clean water, energy decarbonization and climate issues, and even local impacts of development. Next slide. So PennFuture is very lucky to have a legal tool in our tool belt. Legal actions, including litigation, are one of the strongest tools that we have, but it is often a tool of last resort. As Pat mentioned, we utilize policy, legislation, communications, education and outreach, and civic engagement to move forward on environmental and community protections. But when we need to, PennFuture is prepared to go to the courts to demand the changes that we need. And we do this by bringing civil, not criminal, that's not our jam, cases on behalf of PennFuture and our membership. Next slide. So what does environmental litigation look like in Pennsylvania? And note here that I am focusing on those courts that are the focus of this election-based webinar. And so we're not going to be talking about federal courts or Pennsylvania's Environmental Hearing Board or other administrative tribunals. So depending on what we're trying to accomplish through our litigation, whether it's stopping polluters, stopping a permit, overturning a bad decision, or enforcing laws against polluters, that will determine in which court we will file our action. So at the state level, as you can see here in this pyramid, there are many different levels of courts, and the majority of environmental cases go either to the Commonwealth Court or the Supreme Court, either directly or through the appeals process. So that's why they are starred. PennFuture also has been before the courts of common pleas more recently for land use and zoning cases. Next slide. And while not exactly courts, there are judicial style hearings at the local level. For example, zoning hearing boards and the hearings that they undertake, at which local elected officials act as the decision maker, much like a judge does in the courtroom. And these types of cases are usually the first line of defense against impactful development projects through zoning and land use matters. So at the state level and the local level, I just kind of wanted to set the stage on kind of why we're here today talking about elections and courts. Next slide, please. But how do the courts help shape our environmental protection, or frankly, sometimes lack thereof, in Pennsylvania? The decisions that courts render are the final word on many matters, which means that courts have the ability to shape the environmental landscape of Pennsylvania for years, if not decades to come. And so I wanted to take just a minute or two to mention some recent wins of PennFutures to highlight just how critical a strong legal system is to the environment and the health of our communities in Pennsylvania. Now, courts have the power to stop polluting facilities from being built. They can overturn decisions and permits issued by the DEP, and they can uphold good environmentally protective decisions of local government or DEP. And here I want to just take a minute to highlight a distribution center case that PennFuture engaged in Coolball Township in Monroe County. And I wanted to mention this one because it really shows just how interacting with each level of the court system can make a difference. So here, PennFuture did engage as a party at the local zoning hearing board hearing. And this included presenting expert witnesses, evidence, and cross-examining the developer's witnesses. In doing so, our attorneys were able to provide the zoning hearing board with the evidence they could point to determine that in this case, the proposed project that bordered a high quality stream was a distribution center and not a warehouse, and therefore was not allowed in the zoning district. We then intervened in the developer's appeals to the Court of Common Pleas and up through the Commonwealth Court, following it back up and down through the courts as we kept on winning at each level and the developer kept appealing. And this took over a year plus of active litigation on our part. So I think that's really important to show why, as Molly and others will talk about, why these elections are so important. Courts also have the power, as Pat mentioned, to strengthen and defend our constitutional environmental rights under Article 1, Section 27 of our Pennsylvania State Constitution, which gives us the right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. And I think importantly, courts have the power to uphold strong environmental statutes and regulations. So if we can get our General Assembly and our state agencies to put forth strong environmental statutes and regulations, courts will uphold them, like they did with, for example, the Delaware River Basin Commission's fracking ban in the Delaware River Basin. So next slide. So why am I saying all of this, right? I wanted to lay the groundwork for the discussion in the reality of what courts can do for our environment because in Pennsylvania, we elect our judges and local officials. I wanted to take just a few minutes to show you not only the power that these courts and tribunals have, but the power that you have in electing them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Molly.
Thank you so much, Abby. I really appreciate that. It is always so exciting to hear about the often behind the scenes, but absolutely critical legal work that underpins so much of what we do in this state. I'm here to transition us to the electoral portion of this call. Hi, my name is Molly Parson. I'm the executive director at Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania. CVPA is the political voice for the environment here in the state. We work to elect, lobby, and hold accountable leaders in the state who care about clean air, clean water, and clean energy. Now, as we transition this portion of the presentation, we'll talk explicitly about the electoral work that CVPA and other partners did, which I want to be clear is legally separate and distinct from the work our strategic partners at PennFuture just described. So, with that in mind, first we're going to talk about what actually happened on election day. In addition to the incredible victories in the statewide judicial races that Sam just shared timelines on, we being Conservation Voters of Pennsylvania, also endorsed a number of additional races at the municipal level. And these were mostly at the county level, positions like county executive and county councils, from Erie to Lehigh Valley to Luzerne. And I'm so kind of still astounded and thrilled and proud to share that this was a record-breaking year where 100% of our endorsed candidates across the state won their elections. And for clarification, these were not just shoe-in folks. These were not just incumbents who were 100% going to win. These were some challengers. These were hard elections to win. And I think this is really a blatant referendum on the desire for folks at the local level to be represented by elected officials who care about clean air, clean water, clean energy. And so I am just so excited about this. Next slide, please. As Sam has shared, we ran a very significant program in the context of that moniker of most expensive retention race in history, the first of its kind type of race in the state. Conservation Voters Pennsylvania was really able to step up, and we had our kind of biggest year yet. This was our largest ever judicial and municipal program. We often call it off-year elections, although as our political director likes to say, there is no such thing as an off year in Pennsylvania politics. But that being said, these are, as Sam said, very low salience elections, typically quieter, typically less expensive, and that was absolutely not the case this year. And so we really stepped up, our donors and our members stepped up, and we ran our biggest program ever, spending and aligning spending with our partners at Earth Justice of over $700,000. This program was also deeply collaborative. We collaborated with a number of partners across the space, from folks like Project Keystone to Earth Justice Action, who are our primary partners in bundling resources and figuring out the programming for this election. We also worked with some other incredible groups that really, I think, represent the diversity of what types of organizations and issue advocacy areas care about judicial elections. We worked with Asian Pacific Islander Political Association, and they did some multilingual calls into Bucks County to make sure voters had the information they needed to vote in these elections. We worked with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a group that promotes the separation of church and state, especially in our judicial branches. We worked with New Pennsylvania Project, an incredible group that does voter registration, education, and turnout all across the state, and more. As Sam described, the Vote Yes Coalition that came together with a really high degree of coordination and, message consolidation was very unique this year and critical in winning these races. And the impact was widespread. These were statewide races, and so we had to run a statewide campaign. And while we did drill down in certain areas, we achieved over 19 million touch points with voters, from in-person interactions to on the phones and over text to digital ads that we aired across the state. Deeply, deeply proud of the amount of voters we were able to get important information in front of, especially in an election scenario where we knew education was going to be so important. Next slide, please. So, as we've already kind of explained, our theory of change for this election was that education about the Supreme Court, who these justices were, what role the court plays in issues that folks care about, and the fact that we elect judges to begin with in this state, which makes us kind of unique, was going to be absolutely critical. And you saw that enormous bump we achieved in the polling by speaking first and speaking loudly and connecting the justices in these elections to the issues that folks care about, like the environment. So that's where we started with our programming. CVPA worked with Earth Justice Action, as I described, starting in August, nice and early, to run some digital to run a lot of programming that was purely educational. We weren't telling folks who to vote for. We weren't telling them to vote yes or no on retention. We were just telling them, hey, we have elections coming up. Here's the information you're going to need to vote in them, and here's who's on the ballot, and here's why it matters. Most importantly, trying to make that connection for folks about why these races matter. As part of this program, we ran digital ads with over 14 million impressions across the state. These were targeted at both our members, so some of y'all may have seen our ads, and I'll show them to you in a second, but also voters across the state who we know care about environmental issues, and we're going to be motivated to engage in this election with an environmental message. We had a phenomenal Why Courts Matter webinar. You saw a little bit of some of the information that some of the types of information that got shared there from Abby's presentation earlier. There were 250 folks from across the state coming to learn about the basics of judicial retention and why the courts matter on the environment. We set up a new website that we're actually going to keep going, and it's going to be a perennial source of information, pasupremecourt.com. Kind of can't still believe that we got that URL. And then we also sent out a voter guide, and this was a nonpartisan guide that just kind of explained the judicial decisions on a number of factors, including on environmental issues. Before we go to the next slide, I'll just preface it by saying we're going to show our digital ad that we aired across the state, and you're going to see in this clip the way we incorporated some of that messaging that Sam talked about. You know, the environment did pop as one of the most persuasive issues that we could talk about when we're talking about these justices and making that connection for folks. And so this was really our first touch point for folks, our most widespread touch point, and our biggest educational opportunity. So if we can go to the next slide and click play, hopefully it'll play well.
Air we can breathe, water we can drink, the health of our communities might all be up to just 7 people. The justices of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The court is more important than ever, deciding cases that determine how we can live our lives. And for our fundamental rights, they might be the last line of defense, or will let the last domino fall. Learn more about the importance of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
Thank you so much. So, as you can see, we hit on a couple of really important themes there. The impact that the court has on clean air and clean water and the values we all care about. The fact that we are kind of unique in Pennsylvania, that we have these 7 people that we elect. They're not appointed, they are elected, and that that's an awesome responsibility that we have as voters in this state. And also setting up the stakes. It's really important for voters to know what the stakes are. And, you know, without even coming out and having to say it, you know, we're alluding to the incredible damage that has been done by the current anti-environment Supreme Court down in Washington. And kind of setting the stakes here in Pennsylvania that it doesn't have to be that way, that we can make a difference. If we go on to the next slide, we'll talk quickly about the next portion of our program. So typically we educate voters first, and then we have to persuade them, and then we have to turn them out and make sure they vote. And that's kind of the arc that all of our electoral work follows. We talked about why the education piece was going to be so important in this election, but I want to give good service as well to the importance of persuasion, convincing people that vote yes was the pro-environmental vote, and then turning those folks out. There was a lot to indicate that this was going to be a low salience election, a low turnout election, and we had to combat that. We also had to combat the ballot drop off, the roll off, people not voting to the end of their ballot. As well, that Sam had mentioned earlier. Many of you probably noticed that these races were on the back of your vote by mail ballot or all the way on the bottom, following a whole number of municipal races. And so again, like the persuasion and the turnout pieces were really important as well. So we moved to this portion of the program for October and through GOTV weekend, Get Out the Vote weekend in November. And this was where we really ramped up our communications. And it was really important here to layer this work, to make sure that we were layering tactics. So voters weren't just getting one piece of mail, but they were getting mail, a digital ad. They were seeing us out in their communities. They were getting a phone call. And we were really emphasizing this message over and over again. We sent 5 pieces of direct mail to over 80,000 voters. We layered on top of that phone calls and texts to that universe from our civic engagement team and our partners at APIPA. These folks were supported and helped by an awesome team of volunteers that we recruited and trained to help with this work. They did an absolute incredible job hitting the phones all throughout October and November. We also sent over 100,000 text messages to voters, many of you probably, who received that mail with misinformation, with absolutely kind of blatant lies about the court. And we mobilized rapidly to get those texts out when we realized that folks were really confused on receiving that information. And then we had an in-person part of our program. We were really excited to do something really new and exciting this year. This was in-person voter recruitment and vote tripling at high traffic sites across the Lehigh Valley. What does that mean? That means that we had canvassers outside the local train station, outside the local Wegmans. We had folks at populous intersections with big CVPA t-shirts and signs, handing out snacks and keychains, and all talking to people about this election, educating them that this election was coming up, making sure they had all the information they needed to request a mail-in ballot or to find their polling place, and asking people to do something we call vote tripling. And that means basically, you've probably been asked this, text your friends. Who are the 3 to 5 people you could text who may not know about this election? And can you send them this information? And so programs like that have a really organic and exponential impact in the community we ran it in. We were really excited to do that this year. The final piece of this program was more digital ads that included persuasion and turnout to environmental voters across the state with over 4 million impressions. And as Sam mentioned, we really kept our communications strong in the final 2 weeks of this election. And the bulk of this spending, the bulk of this programming was stood up and realized and happened in those last 2 weeks. And we felt it was really critical to hit people right when they were about to start thinking about these races. You know, these aren't presidential races. Folks weren't thinking about this back in January. We wanted to make sure that we were hitting them right as they were returning their mail ballot, as they were going to vote, to keep that momentum going. I'm going to show you 2 of those ads. One ad that continued to educate folks about these races. And then the next ad is going to be our purely persuasion and turnout one that told you exactly who to go vote for. And we ran these in succession of each other to those same voters in those last 2 weeks. All right, we can click play.
The judicial retention election is the worst named, most consequential election you've maybe never heard of. But the impacts you definitely know. Breathable air, clean water, fundamental rights you count on every day. Those things come down to who wins, because the justices on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court will shape your future. So if you want to have a say in it, make sure you vote in this terribly named, terribly important election that you've definitely now heard of.
So that was our education ad, again, just reminding folks the importance and the stakes here. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll look at just that final little hit of persuasion. All right, that's a quick and dirty one. Let's go to the final slide here. And I want to just ground us before I transition to our Director of Civic Engagement, Jess, to talk a little bit about the final piece of our program. I just want to end with a reminder about why we do this. What is the actual impact that we're having on voters? Why does all this spending, all these resources, all this time and energy, why does it matter? It's not just about winning. It's also about the impact that we have on individual Pennsylvania voters. And so I wanted to share three quick quotes and stories from our civic engagement team and our incredible volunteer team who helped educate and turn out voters. Had a great convo with Erin, asked questions about some of the things the justices have done and was actively looking them up as we spoke. She was really interested in the environment and protecting our rights. Greg was planning to vote by mail because he thought the postmark date was what mattered. Thankfully, we got him the info about the nearest drop box where he'll be taking his ballot tomorrow morning. So, getting really important information in front of voters that helps make sure their votes get counted. And this final one really tugged at my heart. Today, I spoke with Carol, who has cancer and suffers from mobility issues. She was grateful for the hotline number that was going to help get her a ride to the polls because she really wanted to vote, but is almost bedridden. These stories are so indicative of why we do this work, why we put in all this energy, why myself and my team lose a lot of sleep every fall. It's to make sure that people's votes are counted in every election, not just the big national sexy ones, but the elections like this terribly named but terribly important judicial election where everybody's vote really did make a difference. So with that, I will say one more thing quickly actually about next steps. And then I'll transition it over to Jess to close us out here. We have a lot of learning and analysis to do once we can actually see who voted next year. We're going to use those learnings to inform our work moving forward, whether it's continuing to educate folks about the courts with our partners at PennFuture, to who we are going to talk to and where and how for 2026 to keep the momentum going and win more elections next year. We so appreciate everything that everyone on this call has done to support this work. And Jess, I'm going to throw it over to you. Jess is our Director of Civic Engagement and is going to talk about our final piece of programming.
Thank you so much, Molly. I really appreciate that. And if we can head to the next slide, I want to transition to talking about our nonpartisan voter engagement work that we also did this year with PennFuture. We ran this collaboratively with our civic engagement work, our digital team, and with colleges across the region. We really wanted to explicitly empower young voters across the Lehigh Valley to ensure they are ready to vote. To do this, our Lehigh Valley Civic Engagement Coordinator, Ibrahim, focused on organizing college students in person and connecting with them on their love for the environment. And our digital queen, Solstice, focused on organizing college students digitally with her digital cohort, as we've named them. We wanted to not only mobilize students to vote themselves, but also help them mobilize other young voters across the region to ensure that everyone has exactly what they need to cast their ballot, especially in these off-year elections where folks might not be thinking about these elections as much. And so while Solstice helped students create their own content, social media content that alerted their friends and networks to get out and vote, Ibrahim activated students on campus to join the rest of our team and call voters across Lehigh Valley, like you see here, at a phone bank at Muhlenberg College. And we did this in working with coalition with the Pennsylvania Voice Coalition to ensure that we had a focus not only on young voters throughout the region, but making sure we had an explicit focus on activating young BIPOC voters as well. And in total, this work, thanks to the help of our volunteers and our team here, we achieved over 11,533 calls to young voters specifically in this local and judicial year. And I want to head to the next slide because all of this wonderful work, everything that Molly just referenced did it, a lot of it happened across many geographies, but I just really want to pull out a huge win in Lehigh Valley, since that is a critical area of Pennsylvania that both this through PennFuture's nonpartisan voter engagement work, A lot of the extensive programming that Molly referred to at CVPA covered. There were layered campaigns and outreach, and it really contributed to this massive voter record turnout in Lehigh Valley. In some places, as much as double the turnout. You saw a lot of data from Sam earlier. We see on average the turnout here is like 15 to 27% sometimes, and in some places in Northampton, it was as high as 40%. Of course, as a director of civic engagement, I'd love to see that, of course, higher. We'll continually work to make sure, but truly a wonderful accomplishment we were honored to be a part of. And to head to this next slide, I have to give a shout out to our team that helped make this happen. All of the wonderful teams, of course, that worked on these efforts, but especially to our joint civic engagement staff, Neil, Natalie, Kat, Chevelle, and Ibrahim. This amazing team and our volunteer call team across the state worked countless hours this fall to make sure we were making thousands and thousands of calls and empowering voters, making sure they had the information they needed to cast their ballots on November 4th. So we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you guys so much. Whether you voted or reminded your friends to vote or volunteered with us, we're grateful for you. And we now want to head to your questions. So if you haven't dropped them already, please use the Q&A function to drop your question below, and I will pass it back to Molly to head into our Q&A function.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. All right, we've gotten some fantastic questions in the chat. Apologies in advance if we don't get to all of them. It's my fault. I went a little bit long in my section of the presentation. So let's dive right in. A question in the section about any way to know if all these efforts to educate and mobilize voters has a long-term effect on future elections. That's such a great question. I would actually love to put Sam on the spot here. Is there anything that you've seen in your polling that demonstrates that all this work, all this money spent has an effect year over year?
Unfortunately, the short answer to that is voters have pretty short memories in general, right? I mean, I think the fact we should all be thinking about the fact that you are on a webinar to talk about an election that happened a few weeks ago, or the week before Thanksgiving, means that nobody on this call is thinking about politics in the same way that the vast majority of Americans are, which is to say, not at all, right? Most people do not spend much time thinking about politics or policy, and that is part of the reason why advocacy groups that spend on elections do need to spend on elections to make sure that people understand what the stakes are, right? Now, having said that, so there's unfortunately, there is no shorthand to just win every election forever. Having said that, we have seen turnout kind of go progressively upward year over year. Looking at elections, right? So there were, less of the state talked about, or less of the state voted in 2023 in the court election, less of the state voted in 2021 in the court election. So every election that we have had for the last 5 years has been the highest turnout X election ever, highest turnout presidential election ever, highest turnout midterm ever, highest turnout off-year election ever. So there is evidence that the work is having a long-term effect on making people more civically engaged. And then some of the other work, Molly didn't talk that much about doing work around vote by mail, but there's a lot of evidence that as more people are signing up to vote by mail, that is creating more durable voting behavior in those voters. So it's not quite the long memory that we might hope that people will have from election to election. Kind of people still have to be reminded who the candidates are and what office they are seeking and what that office does and why it's important. But we are seeing more and more people vote from election to election.
Fabulous. Perfect answer. Thank you, Sam. I'll also add, since Sam mentioned those magic words, civic engagement, that's what our civic engagement team does all year round. That's one of the important pieces of creating those long-term trends in voter behavior, is not just popping up in September and October and talking to people about why it's important to vote, why it's important to register, request your mail-in ballot, talking about the issues that help us make these decisions, but to have a presence in communities year round to make sure that we are having those ongoing conversations with folks. A lot of folks have been in the Q&A section asking about RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and the devastating decision to pull out of that in recent budget negotiations. Folks have asked whether the state Supreme Court will still rule on the case about RGGI and how CVPA and PennFuture are going to move forward to ensure Pennsylvania still is charting a pathway towards more clean energy across the state. Pat or Abby, I would love to turn this one to you.
Go ahead,
Abby,
Pat.
I was going to say, and Abby can correct me. I think the current status of the case itself is the Commonwealth has filed to have it uh, basically mooted, so withdrawn in terms of the appeal. I think we're evaluating kind of all the legal options at this point in terms of response to that and tend to have a response to that. But that's where it is. So there'll be more there. I'd say stay tuned in terms of what that looks like. And Abby, if either I got something wrong or you have more to add, please feel free to jump in.
No, that was perfect, Pat. We're not going to go down without a fight on this. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thank you both. We've also had several questions about the rise of data centers, and I've seen that we've all seen the conversation about this, whether it's in Facebook comments or in our communities. Given that we just experienced some really phenomenal results in local elections and at the court level, how do we take this momentum to address the rise of data centers and the just massive energy and water consumption that they require? Pat or
So,
Abby, I think.
yeah, so one of the great things that I think PennFuture has that I hopefully we can put in the chat is we do have a data center webpage where we have videos that kind of explain what a data center is and what the impacts are. So I would recommend starting there. We also have Bridget Meyer, our staff attorney, created a model ordinance for data centers. And with these new elected officials at the local level, we are highly encouraging people to review that model ordinance, look at some of the work we have, our public participation, public power piece on how you can go before your local elected officials and push this zoning ordinance to at least know that you have some protections against this new land use that might come to your community. I want to tell people that in Pennsylvania, we can't zone anything out. So your community is going to have to allow it somewhere and somehow. And what our model ordinance does is really try to mitigate a lot of the damages on like what you can control at zoning, like kind of like where it's going is most important. So that's how we're trying to empower the community members to act at the local level. I will say our legal team, our policy team is looking at data centers from all of the angles, including looking at specific facilities and projects. I know one of the questions was dealing with a specific one that we will be following up with. Looking at how this impacts PJM and our grid and our electricity affordability issues. We are at PennFuture, we are on top of this at the state level, at the local level, at the regional level. We are working with partners. We are working with other legal minds. So please come to us if you see something, if you have concerns. We can't be everywhere, so you are our eyes and ears.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Abby. That work is so, so important. We are right on time, and I'm going to close us out with just enormous gratitude. Thank you, first of all, to all of our speakers for being here today, but thank you to each and every one of you on this call, whether you volunteered with our team, voted by mail, told your neighbors about this election. You all made this work possible, and you will make all of the work going forward possible. Simply put, we could not do this without you. We could not educate voters and win these crucial elections without each and every single person on this call. We are so incredibly grateful. You are the people that power our people-powered work. Thank you so much. If your question wasn't answered, if you have any additional follow-up, please feel free to reach out to us. We have put some more information in the chat. Have a wonderful holiday next week. I know I am thankful for every single person on this call, and I appreciate you all so much. Have a fantastic day.